So another overview of some of the new modules that were added to the VCV library recently, and we start with the drum modules from 4MS that were actually designed for the meta module, but we can enjoy them also in VCV itself. We have a selection of drum modules inspired by the Roland 808, 909, and so on. For example, we have a kick drum. Here I'm using the trigger sequencer from Sequencel to trigger it. Right, of course, with all the different controls, even with a nice saturation here with different levels. Right, and of course, CV inputs for everything. I like sending my kick drums through tap tensor from flag, so I'm going to add this just for some texture. Right, we also have a hi-hat module, and this hi-hat module has both closed hat and open hat, so I'm going to trigger both of them, again with the same sequencer. Right, we can choose to choke or not to choke the open hat. Right. And we have also a clap. Right, also with lots of controls. And again, CV inputs for everything. We have also a snare. Also here with the different amounts of saturation. And even toms. So really lovely, very practical drum modules. They sound great, they have lots of controls, CV inputs for everything, really nice. And we have even lots of percussion, right? All sorts of different clave, bell, maracas, and so on. And we get also a couple of utilities. So for example, we get a DAC module. We can use this for sidechaining, for ducking. Right, so here for example, I have a bass. Let me solo this with a VCO unit. Right, and I can use the same trigger I'm using for triggering the kick drum. I can use it to trigger the DAC module. Right, and then set the amount. Right, and then it will be ducked with the kick drum. We have also an accents module that can add accents to different voices. Here I have, for example, just some noise with white noise through a bandpass filter. And I have here a second sequencer that I can use to add accents. Right, so again, very useful. And of course, something that's always fun to do with the drum modules is driving them at audio rates. So here I have two VCV VCOs that I'm sequencing, and they trigger at audio rates. They trigger the kick module and the snare module. By the way, this is Echo. I collaborated with Sapphire on this. This is also a new module that was added recently, but I have a full video about it if you're interested. But again, audio rate triggering drum modules is quite fun. We also have a new module from Grayscale called Nexus. This is of course also available in hardware, and it's an enhanced version of Mutable Instruments Frame, so Audible Instruments Keyframer in VCV Rack, where you can save snapshots and morph between them. So here, for example, I have an LFO going to input 1, and I can add a snapshot. Set this, for example, this keyframe or snapshot will be at 0. So you can see if I click here, click to toggle minimum, maximum, if I just click the amp, it will go to 0. Then I can go to another position, save another keyframe, change the level. Let's say this will be a bit less, right? Something like this. Then go to another position, hit a keyframe, this will be a bit lower, and then go to the last position. I can add as many as I want, but and this will go maybe to maximum. Right, and again, now I can morph between those keyframes or snapshots. Right, and there are many uses for this module. Right, we have 12 inputs and even more outputs that we can use. So here I have, for example, 3 VCOs. I have here kick all and I have some noise. Right, they all go to the inputs here, and I'm using the odd output, which will be this row here, right, that corresponds to this row of inputs. And now I have some keyframes saved, and I can morph between the different levels of the oscillators, basically crossfading between them. And of course, we can also modulate this. So I can modulate this with an LFO, for example. This works great also with different sequencers. Here I have 3 pitch sequences, sequencing 3 different VCOs, wavetable, modern, and classic from Surge XT. Again, this is going as stereo voices to Nexus. I'm using here odd and even, again as a stereo voice. Again, crossfading between them, in this case different sequencers all together. We can also use it as a sequencer by itself. Right here I have different keyframes set with different levels, right? Just as offset level, I'm using the first output, but you can use as many outputs as you want. And in the right-click menu, you can choose also the different modes. So keyframer, again, you can crossfade between the keyframes. There is sequencer, step, and random. With each trigger here in the input, it will either advance to the next key step or to a keyframe, or to a random keyframe, right? So you can really use this as a sequencer, like you can see here on the scope. This is sequencing the VCO unit. We have another module that exists also as hardware. This is Lowstepper from OK Synthesizer. It's basically a dual LFO, but with a few interesting features. So first of all, both LFOs have an end of cycle output. This is great for generative patches, for example. So I can use the end of cycle to trigger a random source. Right, and this random source will in turn modulate the rate of the LFO. Right, you can see in this case I'm using a multi because I'm triggering the random source, I'm triggering another random source for generating pitch information, and also an envelope to envelope this voice that I have here with the VCO unit. I can then use the second LFO to modulate the shape, for example. We also have interesting wave shaping. Right, so first of all I have it here modulating a filter, the classic VCO going through a filter. Right, and I have the LFO modulating the filter, and we can morph between different shapes. You can see this also on the scope. Right, but we can also shape the start of the wave and the end of it, right, and sort of cut them. Right, you can see this is now the start or the end. And of course we can also modulate this. So I have here 2 more random sources that I can use to modulate this. And we can also sync both LFOs. Right here again I have VCO unit going through a filter, and I'm using here a clock to sync both LFOs, and then the rate control becomes a divider multiplier. We also have new modules from Singuine. We have Fortuna, which can route a signal randomly to two outputs, and we have Chronos, which is an LFO, but with 4 LFOs you can use and also cross-modulate, which is also quite fun. So here I have a sequence with slips and the VCO unit, and I'm using Fortuna to send the signal to either a delay with some panning with Prince of Perception or a reverb with plateau. Right, so if I take the probability all the way up, this will be now just output A, which is the delay. All the way down will be just output B, which is plateau. And in the center we have 50-50% chance that it will either go to the delay or to the reverb. There's even an X-fade control here to avoid clicking. This works great also with CV, right? So here I have a pitch sequence and a trigger sequence. In this case it's just the clock, right? We have 2 channels, and again I'm using this to route the sequence and the clock to 2 different voices, an FM voice with 2 FM operators or kick all. Right, and again we have also Chronos. In this case it will modulate a filter again with a VCO unit. Let me just unmute this, and again we have 4 LFOs. So for example I can use a sine wave from 1 LFO. Right, maybe I will take the pitch here a bit up just so we can hear this. Right, and now we can use another LFO to modulate, for example, the frequency of this LFO. Right, I can make this also bipolar by clicking this button here. And then I can use another LFO, let's say a square wave, to modulate the frequency of the second LFO. And maybe this LFO go back and modulate the pulse width of this square wave, and you can get all sorts of different shapes. And again we have another one, I can have more frequency modulation, cross modulate things. You can also sync them, so they have a clock input. So for example I can sync the first one, and there is also a reset input, so I can reset them. I have here a clock divided by 4. Right, just to get something a bit more repetitive, and you can see the shape that we get here. Right, and all of a sudden it's repetitive, and we get an interesting rhythm. There are a few more modules worth mentioning. There is the MC1 module from Dock B, which can record mouse movements, so movement and also gate. Then I can replay it. And of course there is also an input that you can use to trigger this. Right, so this is great fun just to experiment with this. We have also a new shaper from HetrickCV. Right, if I send the output, you can see we can cut, sort of fold or cut the negative or the positive portion, or both of them, which is a sort of a ring modulation, right, voltage controlled attenuverter. There are other outputs that you can use, for example, just the negative or just the positive, right, and shape the waves in different ways. There is also a new drum machine from Teknological. Right, so for example, we have here a kick, snare, right, then we have hi-hats, open hats, clap. Right, and we have all sorts of different parameters to change, right? We have filter, decay, panning, volume. We even have some saturation. Unfortunately, there are no CV inputs here, but this is more for experimentation, I guess. We can also have the individual outputs either together with the main output, right? Or if you set this to link, it will be just from the individual outputs. Right, you can pan things. Right, so another drum machine to experiment with. But that was it for today. Thank you again so much for watching. Cheers.